Hello, and welcome to this edition of Transport Topics Live on Web. I'm Joe Howard, Executive Editor here at Transport Topics, and our subject today is powering the trucks of tomorrow. There are plenty of suppliers out there vying to be fleet's choice to literally move trucks down the road in the years to come. Starting with tried and true diesel power, on through to natural gas, fuel cells, hybrids, and the current hot topic, electric. There's a lot going on in this arena, including some big news coming from the West Coast, where we'll find my co-host, Transport Topics Managing Editor for Features, Seth Clevenger. Seth is joining us from California, where he was among the selected press invited to cover the November 16th introduction of Tesla's long-awaited battery-powered Class 8 tractor. But before we get to Seth, I want to let our viewers know what else we have on tap. For today's program, we interviewed a variety of experts in the industry who have some compelling thoughts on the rapidly evolving ways in which fleets can choose to power their commercial vehicles. We hope that their insight will be instrumental in helping you make your short and long-term business decisions. Today, you'll hear from Cummins Executive Director for Product Management and Market Innovation, Tim Proctor, North American Council for Freight Efficiency Executive Director, Mike Roth, NGV America President, Dan Gage, and Frito-Lay Senior Director for Supply Chain, Mike O'Connell. As you listen to these interviews, if a question pops into your mind, share it with us. You can email your questions or comments to share@ttnews.com. If you're watching on the web, you can comment directly on this page, and if you're watching via Facebook Live, just enter your question right in the comment box. One thing many of us have been commenting on and talking about is the much anticipated Tesla electric heavy-duty truck. And only a precious few have even seen one in person, but one of those people is Seth Clevenger. He attended the November 16th launch of this highly anticipated truck and joins us from California with his report. Seth, you had the hottest ticket in town. How did it go?
Yeah, Joe, it was quite the splashy event last night. So Elon Musk, introduced the truck by driving it into a hangar with the audience was waiting, and got our first real glimpse of this truck. And it is a all-electric Class 8 day cab, and with a range of 500 miles, which is probably higher than some might have anticipated for an electric truck. Mm-hmm. Definitely puts it in the regional range. So if you have a load that needs to be delivered 250 miles, you can use this truck to deliver it there and come back without recharging the truck until you return. So it's also the design is really a complete redesign of what we think of as a Class 8 truck. It's starting by removing the internal combustion engine. It's battery powered. The battery sits under the cab and is powered by 4 electric motors at the wheel ends of the drive axles. So it's the architecture, of course, is just completely different from what we all know and think of as a heavy duty truck. And production for this truck is targeted for 2019, so it's not that far away.
And it's a mile truck. And he guaranteed no breakdowns. I thought that was impressive, that he said it's not going to break down, but then, when he's talking about that, one of the things he says is, well, it's got 4 motors, it can run on 2. So that presumes, and I can't imagine anybody would let all 4 of them go without putting it in for some service. But so he's making the case that if you lose 2 motors, it can still go on 2 motors. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, and it's what really struck me is it was a real Musk really tried to make a business case for this. I mean, this is not a luxury item. This is a truck that's designed to be economical and to bring a better business case than diesel trucks from day one. Mm-hmm. And part of the calculus there is maintenance. Maintenance is a big piece of it. You remove the diesel engine, you remove all the after treatment systems. There's no SCR, there's no diesel particulate filters that can cause maintenance problems that need to be addressed. There's no transmission. It has regenerative braking, so it's in addition to generating energy and that supports the battery, it's protecting the brake pads. So really, this is designed to be a very low maintenance kind of vehicle compared to what we know. So that's a big piece that maintenance, and it's really interesting to hear him guarantee 1 million miles for the electric powertrain. So it's a pretty bold guarantee. and we'll be eager to see how these trucks perform in the real world when they come to market.
And he also guaranteed it'd be a lower cost of ownership from day one, talking about the total picture.
Yeah, so the argument he was making is that this truck, the Tesla Semi, will be cheaper today than the total cost of ownership of a diesel truck. He said a diesel truck is 20% more expensive when you factor in all these various costs, including the vehicle cost, insurance, fuel, maintenance. 20%. The diesel truck is 20% more expensive per mile. That's his argument. That's what his math has come up with, and it's a pretty fascinating statement. We think of electric vehicles as still being pretty high price premium, and there are still some details we would like to learn about the battery in particular. But clearly this is going to be a product that's going to be driven by the business case.
Right.
So there's a clear understanding on Tesla's part that purchasing a truck is not the same as purchasing a passenger car, which is more of a emotional decision, and perhaps you'll pay more for a luxury car. And as we all know, in trucking, it's cold hard ROI. What's going to make the most sense?
Right.
How can I do the job and deliver the freight safely and as efficiently as possible?
And when you make a great point there, because that sets up our first interview actually very well, Tim Proctor from Cummins, because he spoke with Roger Gilroy at the North American Commercial Vehicle Show, and that was one of the cases he made, and the points he made over and over again was that they're interested in the right solution for their customers. And he talked a lot about whatever makes the most sense. So in Tesla's case, they're obviously going to make a claim that this makes sense for these type of operations that they're targeting. I thought it was interesting that they came out with something so very specific to particular duty cycles. I think that makes a lot of common sense, actually. So with all the hype, I think on some level they made a fairly sensible move in saying, here's something that can work in these particular types of operations. I thought that was interesting. And we'll hear from Tim Proctor right now and listen to what he has to say about electric and emerging technologies and where Cummins stands, because let's remember, Cummins has introduced a concept electric truck as well. So the Tesla news is exciting, and we sent you all the way to California for it, but they're not the first ones to come up with one of these concept trucks. So we'll hear from Tim right now.
Hi, I'm Roger Gilroy with Transport Topics, and we're at the inaugural North American Commercial Vehicle Show with Tim Proctor, who's Executive Director, Product Management and Market Innovation with Cummins, Inc.
That's right.
Tim, thank you for being with us.
Oh, thank you, Roger. It's a pleasure to be here.
Answering a few questions about your sort of green efforts as a multinational company. It seems though, starting with the U.S., though, you have lots of opportunities to impact sustainability from a fuel efficiency angle here in the U.S. with your medium duty presence and your X15, X12 engines and AOS electric powertrain. How do you manage all that?
Yeah, so our ambition is to be providing the right power for our customers, the right power solutions, and we recognize that being dependable is their number one objective. They've got to complete their mission. Products are being used in businesses which deliver income and sustainability for the people that are running those businesses. So our products are part of how they do their work. And yet also we have to be a leader in innovation in order to stay at the front of the market, to be able to deliver the value in whichever way is going to mean that the product meets the customer's business needs. And when you talk about green, fuel economy, fuel use is the primary source of the carbon dioxide emissions, greenhouse gas emissions that impact global warming. And obviously it has an economic benefit to the customer to use less fuel as they do their business. But every customer has a different set of priorities in terms of how much their fuel cost builds up into their business costs. So some customers are incredibly sensitive to it and actually insisting from a competitive position in the market that our products exceed by a significant margin the regulated greenhouse gas limits. So, for example, in the line haul space, if you only meet the greenhouse gas legislation limits, you really don't have a fully competitive product, and we have to be innovating to stay ahead of that curve. Whereas in other spaces, we see that the regulators are forcing really strict debates about the air quality from both criteria emissions, but also being concerned about global warming. And in those areas, we see much more opportunity for alternative energy solutions, such as natural gas, where we already have products in North America that are near zero emission performance, that are being used extensively in like port operations in areas in the US that are struggling with air quality more than a greenhouse gas perspective. And then also looking at electrification as an innovation to bring an even cleaner vehicle at the point of use, as well as saving fuel as we look at electric powertrains in a hybrid type application in conjunction with an engine.
Obviously, there are a lot of entrepreneurs that are also bringing out e-axles and hydrogen fuel cell powered vehicles, electric trucks of one kind or another. How closely do you pay attention to that?
Very closely. Obviously, it's really important for us to be aware of what's going on in the industry. We have our own research work that's going on in almost all of those areas. We've been working with electric powertrains for over a decade already, and we have work going on in the fuel cell space as well. It's really a case of what's going to meet our customers' needs. And our position in our brand platform of powering a world that's always on is more about having the right product for every customer. And we come to every one of those customer interactions without a predetermined answer. Because we've got that diversity of solutions, if the right answer for a customer is a diesel powertrain, then that's what we can work with them on. If the right answer for that is an electric powertrain, that's what we can work with them on. And when you look at any one of these other independent disruptors in the market space, they're coming with a very clear innovation, and I'm sure that they will drive acceleration of adoption of these technologies in the market. But they're also coming to every single one of their customer interactions with a predetermined solution. Whereas at Cummins, we want to be really focused on meeting the needs of the customer with the right technology at the right time.
That was Transport Topics' Roger Gilroy talking with Cummins Executive Director for Product Management and Market Innovation, Tim Proctor, at the North American Commercial Vehicle Show in Atlanta back in September. And Seth, one of the interesting things that he said that caught my ear was that Cummins has been researching electric for 10 years. So it's the hot topic now, but at least in Cummins' case, a company synonymous with diesel, they've been after this for 10 years. So they just recently introduced their concept electric truck, but it's not a new idea for them. And he mentioned fuel cell, which is not something we think of when we think of Cummins at all. So it's interesting to me. It's not surprising, but it's interesting that he's talking about these things now at this moment, in the history of trucking when there's so much going on in terms of these new technologies that, maybe it's all of a sudden in terms of people like you and I covering it, but it's not all of a sudden in terms of the people who are out there developing the powertrains. Yeah,
and I guess if you need any clearer indication that there's such broad interest in the possibilities for electric and trucking, you have Cummins, and like you said, they're synonymous with diesel engines, and they see a future where they're doing much more than diesel. I mean, diesel's of course, Cummins is certainly not running away from diesel, but they're diversifying and they're looking at other forms of power for vehicles, and electric is part of that equation.
And they're not just looking at engines. I mean, they've got their deal with Eaton for the transmissions. I mean, in terms of back to engines, though, they've been making the Cummins Westport natural gas engine for years now. So I find it interesting that, and he didn't come out and say this, and they probably wouldn't, but on some level it's a response to the integrated powertrain movement, if you will, that we're seeing from OEMs. Cummins is kind of getting into that business. The day is going to come where they're going to say, I would suspect, here's our engine, be it a natural gas or a diesel, and here is our transmission, and look how well they work together.
Yep.
And also interesting that he talks a lot about the right solutions for their customers, so that be it natural gas, be it diesel, be it electric, which is along the lines of what I think Elon Musk is saying as well. Here is an option for you fleet customers that maybe this will work for you. And Elon, as is his habit, makes a very strong case. But if you need to bring it down to a realistic level, maybe it could. We didn't get to that earlier, but he showcased the charging stations that you can charge a truck while it's being unloaded.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different ways. I mean, you think about electric vehicles, and there's concern, of course, with drivers' time and the time it takes to recharge the vehicle. But Elon Musk is really making the argument that this kind of will just fit naturally into the work cycle as we know it. I mean, drivers today are required to take a 30-minute rest break under hours of service. Well, if they're charging the vehicle during that time and during their rest break, it's just part of their natural day. You end your break, get something to eat and go back to the truck and it's recharged. So he thinks that electric vehicles will really fit in the types of operations we think about and just the general workflow. And if I could kind of just speak about the driver a little bit more, and sort of the driver-facing element of the Tesla Semi, the interior of the truck really did stand out as something that was not like something we see in a truck today. The driver's seat is actually in the center of the cab, not offset to the left, so it's a very different feel. It's kind of akin to a Formula One race car in a way, and it's very open. You have a wide range of view out of the windshield, and you think about how that will work with the driver, and another piece that's actually quite different is, so the instrumentation on the dash is all gone. That is now on two touch screens that are on the side of the steering wheel. So there's two large screens, touch screens, and you don't have this traditional dash with the speedometer, and you don't have knobs for the HVAC. That's all on these two screens, one on each side of the steering wheel. So it's really a whole different kind of user interface for trucking. And you think on one hand how a traditional older driver might react to that, probably feel like they're in a SpaceX rocket rather than a truck.
Right.
And you think about some of the initial resistance there was to something even like an automated manual transmission, as the industry now, of course, has clearly been moving away from manual transmissions in a lot of applications. But there was some initial resistance, and we continue to see a little bit of that with ELDs, with electronic logging devices. So that's a lot lower level technology than kind of a completely redesigned Class 8 truck. So you wonder how an older driver might respond to that. But then you think on the other side, a younger driver, maybe the millennial, a 20-something who has never considered a job in trucking. And as we all know, the industry is just really desperate to attract younger people to the industry as the workforce ages, and we continue to see a shortage of qualified drivers. Hey, maybe the chance to get behind of this this truck that kind of feels like a spaceship is going to be attractive to some of these younger potential drivers, and maybe that's part of the process of attracting younger drivers to the industry.
And that issue came up on a previous LiveOnWeb, as a matter of fact, when we talked about recruiting young drivers, and the idea that all of this technology is native to younger drivers. They're not scared of it. They embrace it. They're looking for it. They want it. Can you imagine a 20-something getting into a car and it doesn't have some kind of touchscreen? Why would they buy this vehicle? So I think the same is going to be true of the next generations, if you will, of drivers. They're going to get into these trucks and expect all of this stuff to be there. It's part of their life, and if it isn't there, they're probably not going to be interested. So yeah, I think that it may freak you out that there's no speedometer. But by the way, is there a head-up display on the windshield, like for miles per hour?
There's two touch screens on the side. This is what you're looking at,
okay,
and they're just both to the side of each side of the steering wheel. So you're glancing left. HVAC controls and
Yeah.
your speed and all that stuff. So it's all been kind of consolidated on these touchscreens.
And it's like a spaceship. Yeah. It's pretty cool.
Right, yeah, kind of.
But I mean, all of this whiz bang technology is cool and exciting, but diesel's not going anywhere. And I think we all agree on that. We're a long way from the day when trucks won't be fueled by diesel. There's broad agreement it's going to be the industry's primary fuel for years to come. And a recent program initiated by the North American Council for Freight Efficiency demonstrated that significant gains in fuel economy can be achieved from a combination of driver training and broader adoption of equipment currently on the market. NACFE called this initiative Run on Less. And it involved 7 trucks operating in real-world conditions, including some time spent hauling freight during Hurricanes Harvey and Irma. The 7 trucks covered 50,000 miles in 17 days and averaged 10.1 miles per gallon. As NACFE Executive Director Mike Roth explained in an interview right here in TT's studio in Arlington, Virginia a little while ago, these drivers weren't trying to be hypermilers. They just use a combination of good driving habits and good equipment sometimes, when the equipment was available, to produce some pretty impressive results. It's an example fleets can learn from and deploy right now. So let's hear from Mike.
Run on Less was maybe our first big event, Joe. It was highlighting 7 fleets and their tractor trailers and drivers, and we sought to go find some of the most fuel efficient fleets out there that are really getting it done, and we were able to do that. So the run lasted 17 days in the middle of September, ending at the North American Commercial Vehicle Show, and we accumulated, those 7 trucks and drivers accumulated over 50,000 miles, and they did 10.1 mile per gallon. I mean, amazing. Higher than even I thought. And pretty impressive. And it was really maybe most impressive because it came during the hurricanes. So the first week of the run, Harvey was coming up through Texas, and then we had Irma come up the East Coast. And these drivers in these fleets said that the challenge of a lot of wind and unexpected routes, dropping some trailers when, in some cases they had to drop a highly efficient trailer and pick up a dog or a older, less efficient, not the technologies on a trailer, and just the congestion and all that. So, we monitored the conditions that they operated in, and really feel like, first of all, it's real world, but secondly, with the weather and the circumstances, the 10.1 is pretty impressive.
Now, what's impressive about that is you talk about how they had to go from an efficient trailer to a dog. So you're thinking that, wow, we're going to see these numbers come down when we're backing away from the equipment. So how does that get into driver training and driver habits? So in a case like that, where you're saying, okay, well, we can't count on the equipment to really be there to help us, so then it gets down to driver training.
Yeah, first of all, these were 7 awesome drivers. They were picked, so we had a mega fleet in US Express, and we had some fleets around 1,000 trucks, and we had an owner-operator. So we had a mix of size of fleets, but these truckers and these drivers are really impressive. So when challenges are put to them, they want to stay on their A game. They're watching that fuel economy and all their readouts. We had one driver have 4 different coaching tools and readouts in the truck. And so when they're thrown a curveball like the Hurricanes, they work to know how to handle it. So whether that's dropping a trailer, headwinds and tailwinds. We had one truck that literally drove into Harvey, and Irma pushed him a week or so later. On that truck, we saw something like 12.5 to 11.5 mile per gallon, or 12.5 to almost 11 mile per gallon. So a big fuel economy difference. And that's one of the things we're going to start looking at moving forward as we look to produce a report on the run, is what effect does payload and wind and trailers, average speed, or the speed of the truck. Slowing down saves fuel, but how much is too much? And we're going to look through all of this data. We have 99 days of driving amongst these trucks over that 17 days. And we're going to get in and maybe even look at the data by hour to really understand what was going on. NACFE, in our work, we've got 85 technologies that we're watching. Okay. Some have already scaled to either standard or very high adoption, and others are just starting to emerge. So we watched and looked at the specs these fleets brought to Run on Less to understand what combination of those 85 each of them had. And it was a pretty good diversity, which also leads us to believe that there's not one answer here. Yeah, I mean, I've already been asked, does 10 mile per gallon potential of these diesel tractor trailers, not even call it potential, this is what available technologies that they brought to the table today, does that make the business case for electric trucks or hybridization or some of these more advanced things lower? And so I think if you know, for those who are developing, you know, significantly different tractors, you do have to make to count on the baseline getting better, and so they're going to continue to get better. And so yeah, we've been studying a lot of technologies. We've done 20 confidence reports, and so we've studied a great deal of the available technologies. We looked into the future a bit with two-truck platooning and electrification of accessories. And, you know, maybe we'll get involved in some of the more, I'll call them maybe like revolutionary things that people are asking about. But it all comes down to, you know, just the good, hard, diligent work that we all know. You know, understand your duty cycle, understand the business case you have as a fleet. Manufacturers talk to fleets, just don't talk to one or two, talk to hundreds, because there's various different duty cycles and business cases out there. And start to work on what makes most sense to you. You know, the higher the speed, the more important aerodynamics are. The lower the speed, tires become really important. They're all important, but depending on how much start and stop you do, miles you travel, dedicated routes versus irregular general freight hauling routes, you know, fine-tune what you operate in or where you're going to sell your products into. And then just understand what's available and work hard on it, always with an attitude towards total cost of ownership rather than being too specific on fuel saved and cost of the device. Don't forget the engineers are always working. And so, you know, we are starting to see new skirt designs. We're starting to see designs emerge that might replace skirts, you know, and be interesting to buyers. So, you know, as soon as you think something's there and going to be there, somebody innovates and comes up with something new. And so one of the things that NACFE wants to do is help speed up that whole process. You know, accelerate adoption, accelerate new generations of products, help the manufacturers know where the issues are, help the fleets with all that, and with all that trying to get to this 10, 12 mile per gallon fast. Yeah, we're in some real exciting times. I mean, you know, I think that the two areas of a lot of focus, you know, automating, maybe autonomous, possibly self-driving trucks, and electrification, I think have one common thread, and that is that the industry now believes they're possible. So having a truck that can either follow another one autonomously or drive itself, you know, maybe with a driver for a long time, don't get me wrong, but automating that process more and more all the time, electrifying, battery costs, power electronics, motors, all are, you know, the costs are down and the performance is up. And I think if you really quiz the engineers, the fleets, the manufacturers and so forth, just in the last year, both of those have become realistic. And so if it's realistic, then now how do we make it happen? And I think, you know, we've kind of gone from, oh, I don't see that happening. You know, a battery might drive a 2,000-pound car, but it's not going to do an 80,000-pound truck. You know, that's sort of been myth busted, if you will.
That was NACFE's Executive Director, Mike Roth, talking about that group's Run on Less program, a pretty interesting program that returns some impressive fuel economy results. As a reminder, you're watching LiveOnWeb's look at powering the trucks of tomorrow. We invite your participation in the show. You can email questions or comments to share@ttnews.com or comment directly on this webpage. If you're watching via Facebook Live, simply enter your question into the comment box. And check out ttnews.com and liveonweb.ttnews.com later for the full interviews with all of our guests, Mike Roth and the rest of them. So Seth, one of the things that I thought Mike said that was interesting, I mean, he said a lot of interesting things, but he talked about total cost of ownership. I mean, I can't believe our accidental good luck that he talked about that, you know, when he was here in our studios, and here Elon Musk was making this case that nothing beats his electric truck, diesel can't compare. We'll see about that. But it is interesting when you think about the total cost of ownership for a vehicle, how after a while, it's almost like certain things get cooked in. You know, he said it, he made a great point. The engineers are always working. So, you know, things are always improving. So, and, you know, he talked about skirts. trailer skirts are ubiquitous these days. You know, say 10 years ago they weren't, but now they're everywhere. They've become cooked in. So fleets are going to have to continually find new ways to locate efficiencies, because that's kind of backed out now. That was the cool new thing whenever they came out, but now, what's next? So when he talks about the engineers are always working, and we're looking at all these new technologies entering the market, it does become something of a challenge, and it's like fleets are like at the dog track, the dog's chasing the rabbit. You're always chasing that rabbit. You're never going to catch him. But they're always chasing that rabbit, always trying to chase that next thing, that next big thing that's going to improve their efficiency and bring down their total cost of ownership.
Yeah, it's actually pretty amazing when you think about how far diesel trucks have come in the last 10 years. Really, going back to we always look at the introduction of DPFs in 2007 as kind of a milestone moment, but really since then we've seen tighter and tighter emissions controls. We've seen more and more aerodynamics, side skirts, trailer tails, and increasingly that's touching pretty much the entire vehicle. Tractor fairings, wheel covers, even tire pressure monitoring and inflation. Right. There's so many systems that have really caught on over the last several years, last decade plus, that have increasingly been put to use in the industry, and trucks today are more fuel efficient than they've been, and that drive for more progress there just continues.
And when you mention things like, something as simple as tire pressure monitoring, but it's one of those things that over time, as people see that they work, as people find, it does work, it is kind of beneficial. I mean, maybe I will go ahead and add that, to my next order. One of the things Mike Roth said I thought was also interesting was that as fleets see that these technologies can work, it eases adoption. He was talking about platooning, but it speaks to anything that's new, that over time, when people see that it works, when people see that there is a return on investment, total cost of ownership and ROI, I mean, it's kind of the same thing. So I remember seeing a futurist one time at a conference, and he said, the future's right in front of you. You just have to be paying attention. So, and he was speaking about just this, that when all these things are coming into the market, coming into a market, whatever that market may be, you just have to be paying attention and see that, I better take a look at this, because it might be something I'll embrace down the road. It might be something that can benefit my business down the road, whether it's TPMS or a battery electric Class 8 tractor.
Sure. In electric, I mean, it's just given the amount of interest from not just the new players that are coming into the industry like Tesla and Nikola Motor Company, right. But also the traditional players, Cummins, and you talk to the traditional OEMs, they're all looking at electric. We see that really from top to bottom, and kind of becomes a question of not really of when, but just how, or if, but a question of when and how soon. What applications does it make sense sooner rather than later, and how long does it take to for an electric powertrain to work in a true kind of a regular route, long haul kind of operation. Right. And these are open questions, and just a matter of how long it takes. And diesel, I think we mentioned earlier, has a long runway ahead of it in trucking, and we may be witnessing the early stages, the infancy of its eventual successor in electric, and we'll see if that comes to pass. And when.
Yeah, well, it's funny you mentioned that too, because it wasn't that long ago we were having this conversation about natural gas. Natural gas hasn't gone anywhere. It's an option that works for some of the same applications that people are now saying work great for electric. Arguably, all the attention focused on electric right now has taken the air out of the room for natural gas. We have diesel prices that have remained at reasonable levels for a while now, but the bottom line is, with natural gas, it's still here. It's still the 100-year fuel. At least that's what's been being called. But what has changed, as NGV America President Dan Gage told us here recently at the TT Studios, is a program through which billions of dollars in new incentive money is being made available for the purchase of natural gas trucks. As part of Volkswagen's settlement with the federal government over the diesels in their passenger vehicles that exceeded federal emissions limits, that company is providing $2.9 billion in funding to states for the purchase of clean air vehicles, including natural gas trucks. Now, incentives have always been a big driver when it comes to the sales of natural gas vehicles, which have historically carried a price premium over diesel trucks. But Dan Gage makes the case that the combination of inexpensive fuel, clean emissions, and the billions of dollars that will soon be available through this settlement combine to elevate natural gas in the discussion of powering the trucks of tomorrow. Let's hear from Dan.
Well, electrification is certainly an option, especially for light duty, but it's not commercially available yet for medium or heavy duty, and that's important. It's important when we think about emissions. We think about emissions controls and reductions in greenhouse gases, reductions in nitrogen oxide or NOx. Natural gas provides a very real solution today for all of those problems, all of those issues, all of those challenges. It's reliable, it's available, and it's sustainable.
Now, in terms of cost, there's been historically kind of a concern that, yes, they're very clean and they're available, but there's a cost issue. And incentives have certainly been something that have helped move natural gas vehicles along. I know that as part of the settlement with Volkswagen, there's some opportunity there for, and I don't think people probably realize that, there's opportunity in the heavy truck space as well as part of that settlement fund.
Well, the Volkswagen settlement will provide $2.9 billion to the states to distribute for a whole host of projects that with the end goal of reducing emissions. And when you look at all of the different options that are available, everything from diesel to electric to potentially fuel cell someday, and natural gas, it's natural gas that provides the biggest cost-effective benefit in terms of investment of those funds. We've been doing our part at NGV America with our member companies to share that information, share the facts with those who are putting together these plans in all of the states. And eventually, very shortly, there will be funds available and public-private partnerships will be able to apply for them.
So public-private partnerships will be able to apply for them, or so it wouldn't be like an individual company that could apply for some of those funds, or could they?
It could be. It could
Okay.
be transit authorities. So every state can do it differently. I mean, there's a host of rules and regulations that are set forth by the trustee and the judge, but each state will have its own plans based on needs. And our argument to those state regulators is that it should be focused on the biggest investment of resources with the biggest benefit, and also focus on those areas that have the dirtiest air.
So when you said $2.9 billion, is that the entire settlement, or is that specific to just these applications?
It's $2.9 billion for Appendix D, which applies to these funds that go to the states.
Okay.
When I think you have to realize that fleet operators, when they make money, it's when their trucks are rolling down the highway and not plugged in. Currently, there's no available electric technology that meets those heavy-duty and medium-duty demands. Natural gas does. Besides its emission benefits, and the new Cummins Westport engine has, in essence, a zero emission equivalent rating by both the EPA and CARB. It's a terrific opportunity. It's a terrific option for fleet managers. When you look at electric, this is still a promise days down the road. If and when it becomes available at the heavy-duty level, it will likely be incredibly cost prohibitive. There are few details about what the size and weight of the battery packs and how those will be incorporated into the entire tractor-trailer package. So when you look at whether electric is an option, it's not an option today. Well, I think what we're going to see are more and more communities, more and more politicians, more and more elected officials that recognize that there are some serious issues with air and air quality in our most urban areas, and what can we do to invest in improving that situation. And it will likely be around medium and heavy duty. It'll likely be around ports with ships in and out, marine vessels in and out. And how can we transition from traditional dirtier fuels or older vehicles into cleaner vehicles that have less of a negative footprint. We're seeing it around ports. We're seeing it around inland ports like rail yards. And certainly we're seeing it from some of our members who invest in, for instance, school buses trash trucks, where we're seeing vehicles that drive in and out of neighborhoods.
Yeah, and to that point, final mile. Final mile's only going to get more important as as we go. So there's probably a big opportunity. You mentioned medium duty. I dare say that's where there could be real opportunity for natural gas trucks, is in that final mile.
Agreed.
Local delivery.
And you mentioned too, sort of partnerships with electric, and so we have members like UPS that have natural gas fleets, but then they're looking at that final mile because there are some cities saying not going to be any trucks, right, available to be able to drive in those cities 20, 30 years from now. So how does a company like UPS get to that final mile? I mean, it's interesting. There's a lot to do and a lot to look forward to. And electric is certainly something that's very exciting.
That was Dan Gage, the new president of NGV America, talking with us here in our TT studios about natural gas and the opportunities that exist for fleets with natural gas, including that VW settlement we discussed. But Seth, again, another one of those happy accidents when he said electric is still a promise. And he's got a leg to stand on there. These are concept vehicles we're seeing. Navistar has electric coming out. Freightliner has theirs in Europe and some medium duty. But for the most part, for Class 8, it is a promise. And a natural gas truck, you can walk over and buy one today. And there is fueling infrastructure. There is a business case to be made, if with this incentive money, certainly. But if clean operation is important to you, if there are regulations that you have to comply with, of course we could think of the ports. There is a case, and it's here, and there is a fueling supply that is abundant. Maybe it's not as easy to get your hands on as diesel, but there is an abundant fuel supply, and you can get it, versus the attention being paid to electric that, again, was being paid to natural gas just a few short years ago. But the bottom line is, this is something here that is a right now option for fleets.
Sure, and it's of course back 3-4 years ago, it was I think pretty broadly expected that natural gas was really going to kind of skyrocket as a fuel for trucking and really get a lot more market penetration. And of course that was back when diesel was $4 a gallon, and the domestic fracking boom has really lowered diesel prices, and that kind of removed the urgency to change to look at all fuels. So that really kind of undercut that projected growth, but it's still there. It's still being used in a lot of sort of niche applications where it makes a lot of sense. And even if the hard dollars business case isn't as strong as it used to be, there's still cases where you might have certain shippers with corporate sustainability goals, and natural gas might be a way of doing that. And perhaps those shippers will look to fleets that are using natural gas as a way to reduce their carbon footprint and meet their self-imposed goals.
And to that point, you talk about how some of those corporate sustainability goals, and if that's important enough to a fleet that they're going to make the investment. In this case, in a natural gas or an electric. We do have a question from a viewer, from Eric, who asks, what are some of the indicators that you think we should be looking for to signal that these disruptive technologies are actually gaining more market acceptance? My personal take on that is when you see some big names and or some big numbers moving. I think it's a little early just yet. Let's use Nikola as an example. U.S. Express, they were there for that. So they've said that this is something that is interesting to them. So there's indication that at least one major fleet is interested in this technology. But I think as you see more of that, you've got a UPS. They try everything. I think they're a leader, and they should. We should make note of that. They experiment with just about everything. But when you start, it kind of gets back to what we were saying earlier. When you start seeing more and more operators embracing a technology, whatever it might be, a disruptive technology in particular, that's your sign, because I would say they've made a business case at that point. If they're plunking down the money, if they're making the commitment, there's dollars and cents attached there somewhere.
Yeah, Joe, I'd add to that. It's at least in terms of electric, I was struck at the North American Commercial Vehicle Show a couple months back in Atlanta, it's almost just a unanimous message across the manufacturers and tier one suppliers that, vehicle electrification is one, the key trends that they're all pointing to. They all see that as part of the future, and you don't really hear a lot of dissent from the big manufacturers on that point. I mean, there are lots of questions about when and how and where it makes sense, but it's amazing how that message seems to have been embraced, and the potential for electric seems to have been embraced by the industry at large. You mentioned a few of the OEMs that have been spending some time on it. Navistar announced its plans to have a classes 6 to 7 truck, electric truck in late 2019 or early 2020, and Daimler Trucks has been spending a lot of time on this, and they have a Class 8 that they've shown in Europe, and their executives have been teasing an electric Freightliner as well in recent months, and they've been promoting that as a Cascadia E as something that might become possible in the not too distant future. So it's clear that when you see that much unanimity among the manufacturers, it's a sign that that's kind of become the new, or at least is becoming the new paradigm.
Right. And I think that, again, back to Eric's question, sometimes you can look to certain companies as, as leaders. I think that our next guest, Mike O'Connell from PepsiCo, his company is one of those. PepsiCo spoke with, or rather Mike spoke with Roger Gilroy, again at NACV. He's a senior director for supply chain, and he talked with Roger about the many technologies that his company, PepsiCo, is doing. PepsiCo is #1 on TT's Top 100 Private Fleet list, and they're deploying a lot of technologies across their complete operation. In particular, Mike discusses how duty cycles dictate the options the fleet considers, and how it strives to make the best decisions for its fleet regardless of power source. Let's hear from Mike and Roger.
Could you give us a little bit of the background on how PepsiCo sort of became concerned with fuel efficiency and then moved to where you are now, which is in kind of a preeminent position in that area, and also alternative fuels like natural gas?
Sure. So at PepsiCo, we have a business strategy called Performance with Purpose, and it's really focused on ensuring that we're doing everything we can to reduce, in this case, our greenhouse gas impact with our fleet. So it's a broad strategy across multiple areas, but in this specific case, it's around the environment and ensuring that we lower our impact on the overall greenhouse gas and of our fleet. So, when we really looked at how we can improve on our overall performance, unfortunately, there's not one solution that fits all fleets. So we've been involved in shows like this. We've been involved with government agencies, non-government agencies in regard to technical solutions. We focus on people, process, and technology, right? So you referenced natural gas. We have a large-scale deployment of natural gas in our Frito-Lay, which is in our Frito-Lay division, which the reason it works extremely well in Frito-Lay is we have lightweight loads. So the tank is usually, the weight of the tanks is usually an offset to cargo. Well, on the Frito side of the business, it's not. So we can get the efficiencies and the environmental improvements of natural gas, and so we've rolled that out pretty expansively across our business. We really, we have a fleet of about 60,000 vehicles in North America, across all drive cycles, across all weight classes. So we have a team that works with the field operations group trying to identify the best solutions for those drive cycles to create the highest efficiency. So we have clean diesel trucks. We're trying to maximize the efficiency through the work we did with Run On Less and the NACFE and Carbon War Room. We've used alternate fuels like CNG you've referenced. We've implemented electric vehicles and the like.
Now, you do use some for-hire carriers too, do you not?
Yes, we do.
Okay, and I assume that you have sort of sustainability criteria that they should meet and what you look for in them. Could you talk a little about that?
Yeah, so we partner with a lot of carriers in the industry to support our broader business, right? Inbound raw materials, we use carriers a lot more than our private fleet is mostly used for the outbound finished materials and delivery to the marketplace. It's just a competitive advantage for us to do that.
Okay.
So we partner with all our suppliers. We certainly get involved in events like this to showcase new technologies so that our partners will also adopt those technologies to improve their fuel efficiency. So we monitor and measure that. Part of our performance with purpose goals include what would be considered scope 3 emissions, which is the for-hire carriers that we partner with. So in order for us to achieve those goals, we have to partner with them to become more fuel efficient as well.
You touched on electrification a little bit, which is kind of a big topic here now.
Yep.
Can you tell us a little bit more on your view of how that might help you?
Yeah, so certainly there's been an evolution of electrification. We started out in the medium duty Class 6 arena where we've invested in some Class 6 trucks, full electric. We continue to partner with suppliers. I think we're kind of waiting for the industry to catch up and some of these more developmental technologies to be hardened. So there's evolution if you're talking pure electric. Now certainly there's a lot of hybrid solutions out there today. We are finding on our drive cycles that regenerative braking hybrid solutions don't get the benefit that we need because we don't stop and start a lot. We actually make deliveries and we'll be stopped for quite a period of time versus stopping place to place to place, and maybe you do 60, 80 stops a day. So what we need is more of a plug-in hybrid solution or a full electric solution that meets our drive cycle. And again, the reason we even got involved in it early on the Frito-Lay side of the business is we are not weight constrained with the lighter snacks that we deliver. So we did a lot of testing. I do believe that there'll be all kinds of electrification in the future, however you define it, right? With plug-in electric, hybrid electric, full electric solutions, all the way from what you're seeing now in automotive will continue to carry forward all the way up. And there's been some recent announcements on some pretty interesting Class 8 technology, full electric. So we'll see where that goes, but we certainly believe that we will continue to partner with all solutions because of our drive cycle, there will be multiple solutions in our fleet.
Can you give me an idea of how much of your fleet is in this area where, of sort of high fuel efficiency or alternative fuels, even if we consider electrification as a fuel? I mean, how deeply are you really into that?
Well, if you consider clean diesel technology and advancements in, getting somewhere in the 30+% or more fuel efficiency improvement in diesel, electrification, CNG, and the likes, we're probably somewhere between 25 to 35% of our fleet in what you would consider those advanced technologies. Really, because if you go through the cycle we talked about in the life cycle of our assets, really being aggressive back in 2007, 8, and 9, and working to adopt those technologies, right? There's a lot of work, then you just don't go buy the truck. CNG, for instance, we had to build out infrastructure for fuel, we had to build out infrastructure for garages, so it takes some time to implement. But once that's in place, now it's easier for us to adopt newer technology and larger scale quantities.
One thing you mentioned earlier when we were talking before was about sort of driver behavior and what effect that can have on actually maximizing the value of the different kinds of fuel, electric or CNG or diesel. Could you get into that a little bit?
Yeah, so, as we talked about people, process, and technology earlier, our people are highly engaged in our performance with purpose sustainability strategy. They understand how important it is for us to stay competitive in today's business world. So they're highly engaged, right? Tommy, who you met, was here as part of the run event, is very engaged in the programs we're working on. So the reason that's so important is a lot of people understand is the driver can impact, they say some words, at 15 to 25% of the fuel efficiency of a vehicle, which makes a lot of sense, and a lot of people think that just applies to diesel fuel,
Yeah.
when in fact it applies to all your solutions. So let me use the CNG example. When we adopted the technology with CNG, it's just as important that that driver drives that vehicle efficiently as well, or the economics or the environmental benefit deteriorate if, say, they drive the diesel efficiently, but they think well, it's an alternate fuel, I don't have to worry about the efficiency of it. You have to worry about the efficiency of it no matter what the solution is. Energy is energy. Whether you're burning diesel fuel or you're burning natural gas, it's very important that we drive as efficiently as possible. Oh, by the way, safe driving is fuel efficient driving. So, you know, safety is paramount for us as an organization, and ensuring the drivers are driving safe each and every day, like Tommy, who's, you know, a million-mile driver, safe driver for us.
Roger Gilroy at the North American Commercial Vehicle Show in Atlanta. And one of the things I found interesting about that conversation, Seth, was the fairly simple things that go into decisions for a fleet as large as PepsiCo. Number one on our TT100 private fleets list. He talked about how natural gas works for Frito-Lay because the loads are light. And therefore, therefore the added weight of the fuel tanks isn't as important. I mean, it seems so simple, but those simple solutions sometimes matter the most. If it is simple as, well, we can use this inexpensive fuel over here because it works for this duty cycle, but it doesn't work over here, there you go. Because a simple solution like that and a simple decision like that manifests itself in a lot of money, a lot of ROI, a lot of total cost of ownership considerations go into something like that. And his comment about how hybrids only work if you're in a duty cycle where you're going to get some benefit out of the brake regen. Also fairly obvious, but also, again, it's interesting to me that, you know, going forward as it relates to the Tesla truck and everything else coming into the industry, it is going to come down to some fairly simple, obvious decisions about whether or not this technology, whatever it may be, works. And it gets back to what Tim Proctor said back at the top. Does it work for the customer? Either it does or it doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not, this industry is definitely not one size fits all, right? You know, it's very many different applications, you know, different types of freight, different types of trailers, and, you know, different distances covered. There's just so many different use cases, and, you know, the calculations and the decision making are going to depend on who you are and what you haul, and what your, you know, the duty cycle of your vehicles, and you know, the needs of your drivers, and just what your situation is. I mean, it's just, and the answer is not going to be the same necessarily for everybody.
Absolutely. And I think that something that Mike O'Connell said that actually touches back on what our viewer Eric asked about broader acceptance. He talked about how, again, with natural gas in this case, the upfront is the big challenge. And I think that's true of any technology. The upfront, I'm sure that Tesla truck is not going to be inexpensive. You know, there's something else Elon Musk said at his presentation last night is, well, you know, Tesla stuff is expensive. Well, yeah, we're expecting that to be true, you know, of this truck. But that, you know, for a fleet's case, once you've spent that upfront, over time, you're going to realize some return. Once you've made the big investment in infrastructure or in the equipment, at some point, again, it's going to get baked in if you've identified that there's a long-term answer for you in that technology. So the upfront's going to be big, and you know, one other thing that O'Connell talked about was service. You have to think of everything. You're going whatever it is you need to do to service those trucks. In the Tesla case, well, once those two motors go down and you've still got two left that the truck's running on, well, you got to fix those other two. So how do you do that? So that's an investment and a consideration you have to make. But then once that's installed, you're okay. So I think that something that Mike Roth said as well, when he said that once the industry sees that these things work, then that might ease adoption. So going forward, we'll just all have to be watching, you and I and everybody here at TT, we'll just have to be watching to see how the adoption goes. I think there's a lot we're going to be watching in the days and months and years to come.
It's certainly a fun time to be in the trucking industry. You know, just think about all the changes, all the innovation we've seen in recent years. You know, clearly, you know, this is an industry that's changing in a lot of you know, very interesting and exciting ways.
Well, Seth, thank you. We've covered a lot of ground, and we've heard some great insights from some great experts. I'd like to thank Tim Proctor, Mike Roth, Dan Gage, and Mike O'Connell for talking with us about these exciting issues. Again, I'd like to thank Seth for doing this show on West Coast time after what was surely a long night. Seth, thank you. Safe travels home. Thanks also to the behind-the-scenes crew here at TT that make Live on Web possible. If you missed part of this show or would like to watch it again, a replay will be posted later today at our website, ttnews.com, and also liveonweb.ttnews.com. And be sure to check us out online and in print for all of the latest news on these and the many other issues that affect the trucking industry, including Seth's coverage from the Tesla event. Our next Live on Web is scheduled for December 13th, when Transport Topics Managing Editor Lori Grant will sit down with our reporting staff for a look back at the big stories that dominated the news in 2017, and also a look ahead at stories we'll be following in the year ahead. Don't miss it. For now, I'm Joe Howard, and we appreciate you spending some time with us today. Thanks a lot. We'll talk to you later.